From John chapter 10, verses 11 through 15. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. The worker who is paid to keep the sheep is different from the shepherd who owns them. So when the worker sees a wolf coming, he runs away and leaves the sheep alone. Then the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters them. The man runs away because he is only a paid worker. He does not really care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I give my life for the sheep. A man was once spending his vacation with a Scottish sheep herder. And one morning, when the man came in, he noticed that the sheep herder was uncommonly quiet. And he asked him why. The sheep herder replied, I lost 65 of my best lambs last night. Wolves got in. The man then asked the sheep herder how many of the older sheep were killed. The sheep herder's reply was, don't you know? A wolf will never take an old sheep if he can get a lamb. The famous preacher Charles Spurgeon said, take care of your lambs, otherwise, where will you get your sheep from? If a species is going to survive, its young must be protected, or they will become extinct. Of the more than 5,400 species of mammals and more than 9,000 species of birds, about 80 types of mammals and 160 types of birds have simply ceased to exist. They have become extinct. In addition, there are nearly 680 other species of mammals and approximately 680 other species of birds that are endangered or nearing extinction. Some examples of this is the passenger pigeon, which at one time numbered in the billions. Here in North America, we have the bison or buffalo, which at one time was also innumerable. The lion, which has become the hunter's most desired quarry, is diminishing. In fact, some ecologists believe that in the Africa of the future, the lion may be in danger of extinction as a wild animal. In 1970 in Asia, the position of the Bengal tiger of India became so critical that it was placed under complete protection from hunting. And the polar bear in Arctic America and Siberia, not Canada, Arctic America and Siberia, which is threatened by extinction, is also now protected by international treaty. There are a lot of reasons that animal species go extinct or become endangered. I'd like to suggest 4 of them for you here this morning. The first one is hunting. Many years ago, no licenses were required. Hunting was able to happen at will, and in some cases, species were simply wiped out. The encroachment of civilization. Animals are forced to live in areas that is not a great place for them to live. An example that I give is as we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, we live in little suburbs there in the city, and in our backyard live many rabbits, much to the delight of my dog. Not so much to my wife, who is terrified my dog is going to bring her a gift at some point in time. But right in the middle of a city, not a great place for rabbits to live, but we have plenty of them. You know, as humans, we have created zoos for animals to live in. I don't know about you, every time I go to a zoo, it's kind of mixed feelings. It's neat to see the animals, but boy, that isn't what God designed, that's for sure. So. Third reason, commercialism. Commercialism, and you know as well as anybody, in the world we live in today, money trumps all. The desire for money for the human race has become more important than protecting our environment, protecting God's creatures. And so money, commercialism is a reason. And lastly, pollution. And I don't really need to talk about the effect that that has on all living things. So the question is, what in the world does all of this have to do with education? You're the education guy. This has got to have something to do with Christian education. What is this all about? I want to take you back to Spurgeon's statement. Take care of your lambs. Otherwise, where will you get your sheep from? And our scripture reading this morning that stated that Jesus is the good shepherd. Both of those statements speak loudly about our responsibility to care for our youth. Every parent is a shepherd with a flock to nurture and care for. Every pastor is a shepherd with an identifiable flock. And every teacher is a shepherd responsible for a flock of students. But finally, every church member is a shepherd. And in this congregation are members of your flock. And to each one, I believe the Good Shepherd says, take care of your lambs. Otherwise, where will you get your sheep from? I believe that there is a close parallel between the reasons for the extinction or endangerment of an animal species and the dangers that face the lambs for which each of us are responsible for. So let me take a minute with you and look at the spiritual application of each of the factors that we just talked about. The first one is hunting. And in 1 Peter 5, verse 8, it reads, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." Young lambs are especially vulnerable to lions, and I believe that the devil likes lambs. No offense, but old sheep just don't taste as good. He knows that if he can destroy the lambs, eventually there will be no more sheep. We must protect, educate, and guard them so they don't become easy prey. One of the great things about my job is I get to travel around regularly and visit our teachers in their classrooms. And I can tell you that integrated in their curriculum as they are teaching each and every day, in their classes, in their worships, there are spiritual and moral lessons which are presented to our students. God's word is the sword that will give them victory. In fact, Jesus overcame the devil in the wilderness by quoting the psalmist David, who, of course, was a shepherd. And in Psalm 119:11, it reads, "Your word I have hidden in my heart, that I may not sin against you." And in the Great Controversy, Ellen White states, "None but those who have fortified the mind with the truths of the Bible will stand throughout the last great conflict." The church and the school, combined with the home, form an invincible team that can prepare our children to stand victoriously against the roaring lion. The second factor that we talked about was the encroachment of civilization and how it exerts a negative impact on God's creation. In Romans 12, verse 2, Paul admonishes us, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Jesus, in his prayer for us in John chapter 17, verse 15, said, "I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one." Unfortunately, this world has always had and will always continue to have its influence on our homes, on our churches, and on our schools. But by joining forces, we have a better chance to protect our children from the pressures to conform to the ways of this world. The third factor was commercialism. In Mark chapter 8, verse 36, Jesus said, "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul?" It is a privilege for each one of us as shepherds of the flock to use our financial resources to provide an opportunity for our children to obtain an Adventist education. Our schools are church schools, and as a result, they are the responsibility of the church. I am so thankful for members who give willingly to support students in our schools. I can tell you, for the 6 years that I was principal at Bass Memorial Academy, how many times I would get a check in the mail from a church member for a student they didn't know. The student had no idea who they were, simply trying to provide resources so those students could get an Adventist education. It is such a blessing to make that available to our kids. Ellen White, in the book Education, clearly identifies the relationship between the work of redemption and the work of education. She writes, "In the highest sense, the work of education and the work of redemption are one. For in education as in redemption, other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ." What a powerful statement. The work of redemption and the work of education are one. The last factor, pollution, has a serious implication on its effect for youth for today. In fact, we probably don't even need to say youth there, for all of us. We must guard well the avenues of our soul to keep out the things that will corrupt the soul. In 1 John chapter 2, 15 through 17, it reads, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever." Truly, great care must be exercised in our choice of entertainment, reading material, movie selection, the use of the internet. One must not allow the standards of society to become acceptable when God has clearly spoken on these issues. Here again, I believe that the home, the church, and the school must join forces to protect our children. Don't kid yourself, folks. Satan has a plan for our children. But so does God. And how thankful I am for his instruction to Ellen White that outlines the education for our children. Again, in the book Education, she writes, "In this time of special danger for the young." Every time I read this quote, it sounds like she was writing it for today. "In this time of special danger for the young, temptations surround them on every hand." Doesn't that sound like today? "And while it is easy to drift, the strongest effort is required in order to press against the current." And this is probably one of my favorite statements in the entire book that she makes. "Every school should be a city of refuge for the tempted youth, a place where their follies should be dealt with patiently and wisely." God has established our Adventist schools to be cities of refuge to protect our lambs, our children and our youth from the roaring lion. Notice, that doesn't say our schools are perfect. It says they're cities of refuge. The devil doesn't stay out of our schools. He never gives up. He's everywhere seeking to destroy. Students are never exempt from the need to make wise choices. But what our Adventist schools do is they provide numerous opportunities to help our students develop spiritually. Classes integrate spiritual values across the curriculum. Social activities are provided that elevate kids rather than bring them down. Physical activities are designed to recreate, and mental development focuses on the true source of knowledge. How many of you have heard the name Dr. George Barna? Dr. George Barna is the directing leader of the Barna Research Group, which is a full-service marketing research company based out of Ventura, California. They specialize in research for Christian ministries. And Dr. Barna wrote a book entitled Transforming Children into Spiritual Champions. If you haven't read it, I'd encourage you. There are a number of startling and significant findings in this book that cry out for our attention as a church. He points out the importance of the spiritual dimension in every person's life. And in a series of studies, he stresses the importance of guiding our children in their choice of inviting Jesus into their hearts at a young age. I want to share with you the results of two of his studies. The first one is entitled, Why Children Ages 5 to 12 Should Be Your Church's Number One Priority. And he writes, why focus on this particular slice of the youth market? Because if you want to shape a person's life, whether you are most concerned about his or her moral, spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, or economic development, it is during these crucial 8 years that lifelong habits, values, beliefs, and attitudes are formed. In a second study, through a series of surveys and other means, they came up with, from his study, the probability of someone embracing Jesus as their personal Savior. Here are the results. Ages 5 to 12, 32%. Ages 13 to 18, 4%. Adults, 6%. Barna also points out that the spiritual moorings of children are in place by the age of 9. Thus, it's extremely important to provide our children with the opportunity to accept Jesus at a young age. I'm so thankful when I travel around and I get to visit our Adventist schools and their teachers and how they join hands with their homes and their churches in this critical aspect of guiding our children into a saving relationship with Jesus. Church, take care of your lambs. Otherwise, where will you get your sheep from? I believe that our best defense against Satan, the roaring lion, is this three-way partnership between our homes, our churches, and our schools. Look what Ellen White says to underscore the need for our churches to assist in the Christian education of our children. In the book, Counsels to Parents, Teachers, and Students, she writes, while we should put forth our earnest efforts for the masses of people around us and push the work into foreign fields, no amount of labor in this line can excuse us for neglecting the education of our children and youth. And just a little further down the page, she writes, God has appointed the church as a watchman to have a jealous care over the youth and children, and as a sentinel to see the approach of the enemy and give warning of danger. But the church does not realize the situation. She is sleeping on guard. Monday through Friday, as you're heading to work, you no doubt pass multitudes of yellow buses that are on the roads, taking children to classrooms with good teachers, remedial programs, and all sorts of learning devices. Public school can educate our children scholastically. They may even teach the basics of healthful living and a certain degree of morals and ethics. Music, art, and physical education are usually well presented. We cannot, however, count on public schools to help with the most vital of all educational aspects. The public school system will not, cannot, and can never be expected to encourage the development of a Christ-like character in its students. There are a lot of great public school teachers. I have family members that are public school teachers who want nothing more than to do this, but they can't. It's against the law. Dr. Chaim Gano, in his book Teacher and Child, writes, teachers have a unique opportunity to counteract unhealthy influences in a pupil's early childhood. They have the power to affect a child's life, for better or worse. A child becomes what he experiences. While parents possess the original key to their offspring's experience, teachers have a spare key. They too can open up the minds and hearts of our children. Your church is fortunate. You have 3 teachers who day in and day out go to school, and their number one goal is to introduce your children to Jesus. There's nothing more important than that. In Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 20, the second half of that verse, it says, "Where is the flock that was given to you, your beautiful sheep? As a father, my 2 daughters are the flock that God has given to me." But as a Christian, I need to look at every child and youth who sits in these pews each week as a member of my flock. And so how as a church do we answer this question? Where is our flock, our beautiful sheep? If we can be real for a minute, part of the answer is determined by how we spend our money. No church has unlimited resources in facilities, money, staff, or volunteers. Therefore, to be most effective, it is important that a church focuses its resources and efforts where there is the highest probability of success. In the business world, we use the term targeting strategy. Where should we focus our resources and efforts for the greatest chance of success? Now, before I get misunderstood, when it comes to evangelism, I am by no means suggesting that we pick one group and ignore all the rest. That is definitely not what I'm saying. However, we can't afford to ignore the group that gives us the highest probability of success. And if we go back to that data that we looked at from Dr. George Barna, the group that gives us the highest probability of success is children. Only 6% of those over the age of 19 make the decision to follow Jesus. Only 6%. And yet sometimes the largest percentages of our budgets target the age group over 19. We all like a return on investment, and Dr. Barna's research argues that there is no group in greater need of such an investment or one that pays greater dividends on such an investment than children. Traditionally, the primary purpose of evangelistic efforts has been the conversion of adults. The prevailing notion is that the real evangelism that takes place in churches is defined by what we do with adults. Yet the greatest window of opportunity that we as a church have to bring someone to the foot of the cross is when they're under the age of 19. Wouldn't you agree? This is a target population as a church we simply cannot afford to ignore. Educating our young people for eternity must not be a secondary or peripheral effort, but rather primary and central. It can't be financed using leftover funds after every other need has been met. Don't get me wrong, our church has amazing tools at its disposal for the evangelism of our young people. Sabbath school classes, adventurers, pathfinders, summer camp, vacation Bible school. These are all critical components of our church's evangelistic efforts to reach our young people. But let me ask you this question. Aside from 2 to 3 hours a week at church, busy evenings at home with the family that involve getting supper, doing chores, finishing some homework, hopefully leaving enough time for a brief family worship before bed. Our children spend 7 or more hours a day in school. During that huge chunk of time, our students who attend Adventist schools, let me be more personal, our students who attend your school are constantly surrounded by the influence of godly teachers, positive adult role models, and peers who believe in the same thing they do. This offers a tremendous potential for spiritual growth. One of my favorite stories in the Bible, and Cass, you can plug your ears because you've heard this story probably a few times now, so it'll be old hat for her, but I tell my teachers this every day. Every year, I'm a broken record on this. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Zacchaeus. When Zacchaeus wanted to have an encounter with Jesus, what did he do? He climbed a tree. Now, before I got into administration, I was a science teacher, and I can't use the scientific method to prove this fact, but I choose to believe it. I believe that that tree wasn't there by accident. I like to believe, and when I get to heaven, I'll find out for sure, but I like to believe that Jesus made sure that tree was exactly where it needed to be so he could meet Zacchaeus that day. Folks, what do our teachers do each and every day? They plant trees in front of your kids. That's what Adventist education is all about. They would love nothing more than grabbing those kids by the scruff of the neck, and they won't do it. But they would love to grab those kids by the scruff of the neck and throw them into the tree and force them to have that relationship with Christ. But they can't. And frankly, it's not their job. But every day in Bible classes, in loving your kids, when your kids are upset, being there to help them, programs, all the different things that happen in school, all of those are trees being planted in front of your kids. And then they spend an awful lot of time on their knees praying like crazy that your kids will pick one of those trees and climb it. That's the best analogy I can give for what Adventist education is all about. And as a father with 2 daughters, it's why Adventist education was so important to me. The home and the church is powerful, but as a father, I wanted every possible chance I could have to keeping my kids in the church and having that relationship with Jesus, turning it from my faith to their faith. And they've got to climb the tree to do that. And that's the whole point of what Adventist education is all about. I love this quote from education. Teachers do a high and noble work by cooperating with the divine purpose in imparting to young people a knowledge of God and in molding the character in harmony with His. In awakening a desire to reach God's ideal, they present an education that is as high as heaven and as broad as the universe. This education cannot be completed in this life, but will be continued in the life to come. It is an education that secures to successful students a passport from the preparatory school of earth to the higher grade, the school above. In 1990, the North American Division launched a study that you probably heard of. It was called Value Genesis. And in 2000, they launched Value Genesis 2, 2010, Value Genesis 3, 2020 was supposed to be Value Genesis 4. We all know what happened in 2020, and so the Value Genesis 4 hasn't happened as of yet. But these Value Genesis studies, and specifically the last one, Value Genesis 3, really focused on providing suggestions that homes, churches, and schools need to discuss to facilitate a rich and growing faith life in its young people. Value Genesis 3 gave our Adventist educators a reason to be proud. In fact, students in Value Genesis 3 stated that attending an Adventist school was the most significant influence in helping them develop their religious faith. In fact, here were the top 10 responses. Attending an Adventist school, mother's faith, school weeks of prayer, father's faith, grandparents' faith, conference summer camps, student weeks of prayer, Pathfinders, Bible teacher, and Bible classes. And it's interesting, the top 10 choices, 5 of them are Adventist education. Dr. Gillespie stated that the results were 81% of all the students surveyed stated that attending an Adventist school is the most important thing that helped them develop their religious faith. Talk about potential impact. Look at this last powerful statement from Patrick Johnstone, written in a magazine called Rainbows of Hope. It says, "If children's work is neglected, you lose the next generation. Ignore children and sacrifice the future." Seventh-day Adventist education has had a central place in our denomination since the year 1863. To lose that commitment, I believe, would have a negative effect on the very foundation of Adventism. As we move forward, recommitment is imperative. Ask yourself this question as we wrap up. If I were the enemy, where would I put my energy? Any formidable enemy, if deciding to focus on destroying another, would place their energy where it would do the most damage. When it comes to destroying the church, the youth would most certainly be the enemy's target population. Satan has great plans for the children and youth in our churches. He has made them a priority. Folks, just look around. Look at all the stuff that kids have to deal with today that you and I didn't have to deal with when we were kids. It isn't hard to see how much of a priority Satan has made our children. So this morning I invite each of you to remember the mission and what I believe is the non-negotiable commission that God has given to each one of us. We are shepherds. We have a flock to care for. Christian education is a vital component in fulfilling that gospel commission. Satan has placed our children on the endangered species list. We must take heed so they don't appear on the extinct species list. Church, take care of your lambs. Otherwise, where will the sheep come from to fill these pews in the future? Amen.